Okay, здравствуйте, товарищи, and welcome to another one of Stalin's Coffee House videos. You may have noticed a couple changes, obviously. First off, I'm wearing a suit. Now I've decided that I want things to look a little bit more professional, and I want to look a little bit, better in these videos, so I decided I'm going to wear a suit in every single one from now on. Also, I've turned on all the lights. I took, half of the lamps that are in this apartment and put them all in this room to hopefully get better lighting. So maybe that'll also increase the picture quality, as well as I've increased the recording device on my camera from standard definition to high definition, which will obviously give me better video quality. But with all that being said, that does mean I will have to get rid of the beard, maybe at some point. And we'll have more news on that on my other channel about what's going to happen with the beard. But it's kind of weird now. At this point, the beard has kind of evolved to its own character on the show, and it's become its own sentient presence. And I know if I badmouth it too much, it's going to give me a talking to after the show. So I'm going to be quiet. Anyway, I've also got a drink here because I need to drink something to keep talking. Also, I've prepared a little outline so I can keep on track. But anyway, what I want to talk about today is ethical philosophy. I find this kind of philosophy to be the most fascinating of all the schools of philosophy, and it's the most interesting to talk about. But before I really begin, this kind of discussion, before I get into what the major theories of ethical philosophy are, I need to essentially destroy the ethical code that most people seem to go by, and that is the divine command theory, which is the idea that what is right and wrong is dictated to us by a divine being, aka sort of God. And philosophers haven't taken that theory seriously since hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and even religious philosophers and scholars have abandoned it as an ethical code. However, it seems that most of the Christians I talk to, and maybe even the vast majority of people I talk to, seem to think that this is a viable theory and we should all conform to it, at least ethically speaking. But, going through here, there are some positives to the divine command theory, and that is that it's simple. That most people you don't need to think about what's right or wrong. It's all laid out in front of you, and it's just point by point by point by point, as well as it gives you a nice code to judge the lives of other people, which is both can be pluses for the majority of people. And so also it kind of enforces the theory that God is this omnipotent, all-knowing creature, and He's looking over us, and He loves us very much, and all that good stuff. But where the divine command theory really comes into an issue is when we present a question called the Euthyphro question. And this question comes from a Socratic story, and I get to tell you the story because now that all these videos give me an extra 5 minutes, I get to go off on a little bit of a side tangent from the original topics. So basically, I'm sure most of you have heard of Socrates before, but I don't know how many people are actually familiar with his mode of operating. And Socrates always approached it, I call them Socratic encounters, is where he always approaches somebody and he always assumes that they know more than he does, and he wants them to teach him about whatever issue. And then a period of cross-examination will happen where Socrates will ask a bunch of questions and ask ask this person to continually define what they're talking about. And usually it ends up that this person that Socrates is talking to doesn't know as much as they think they do, which kind of leads to a reworking of their thought process or redefining of whatever they're talking about. And Socrates was really big on definitions. He believed that you couldn't say that something was good or something was bad or something was just or something was pious or this person was courageous if you didn't know the definitions for those terms. So, whenever someone would say something like that, he'd always grill them on the definitions, and usually he found out that they didn't know, what the definitions meant themselves. But he did have a very strict code of outlining his definitions. But anyway, this kind of brings us into our youth story. Well, what's happening is this guy named Euthyphro, he's walking down the street, and he meets Socrates, and they're friends already, so they know each other. And Euthyphro looks kind of down, and Socrates sort of asks him, "What's up?" And Euthyphro responds, "I've got to go to court. I've got to be a prosecutor." And then Socrates says, "Who are you prosecuting?" And Euthyphro responds, "I'm prosecuting my father for murder." And Socrates asks, "Why?" And Euthyphro says that this is the pious course of action. And of course, in typical Socratic fashion, Socrates just ignores the whole fact that he's prosecuting his father for murder and all, the emotional torment and inner debate that he must having regarding that. And he just wants to focus on how he knows that this action is pious. So he asks Euthyphro, how do you know what's pious? What's pious? Please teach me what piety is. And Euthyphro responds, he says, piety is what the gods love. And then Socrates says, okay, but do the gods love something because it is pious, or is it pious because the gods love it? And of course that throws poor Euthyphro for a loop, and the dialogue continues until the point where no real conclusion is met. And Euthyphro decides that he's tired of being pestered by Socrates and says, "Look, man, I gotta go to court. I can't sit here and do this anymore." But we can take that question that Socrates asked and apply it to the divine command theory in the form of, are God's commandments right because he commands them, or does he command them because they are right? And each one of those heads up into a different, slippery slope for the divine command theory. But let's take the first one. God's commandments are right because he commands them. That means that it is simply God's commandment that makes an action right. Meaning that he commands us to be murderers simply because he commands us not to murder simply because he commands us not to murder. And there's no reasoning behind that. It's simply an arbitrary statement. Because at that point, he could have commanded us to be murderers, and he's got just as much reason to command us not to be murderers. And of course people are saying, God would never do that. He would never command us to be murderers, but why not? If he commanded us to be murderers, we would not be doing anything wrong. It is simply his statement. It is simply his judgment. And an arbitrary statement or judgment at that. Also, that kind of defies our understanding of the world. Like, I can't hit somebody and simply, well, I command that hit was the moral course of action, therefore I did the right thing, so screw you. No, we can't do that. It doesn't work that way. As well, this kind of line of thinking assumes that if God didn't exist, then murder would be okay. It wouldn't have all the negative connotations that murder has, or stealing wouldn't have all those negative connotations, or rape wouldn't have all those negative connotations. Because if God wasn't there to simply give out his arbitrary demands, then there would be no difference between, preserving life and killing somebody, because by this line of thinking, that's the only difference, is God's command is the only difference between these two moral actions. And of course, we know that's not the case. Regardless of whether or not God exists, if another human being rapes another human being, it still carries all those negative connotations. It would still be a terrible crime. After all, it objectifies a person, it can cause untold psychological damage, and a slew of other things are a byproduct of rape. And this is still a byproduct of rape regardless of God's existence or God's non-existence. However, we can simply bypass all these criticisms of the divine command theory if we take the other question, and that is, God commands things because they are right. But that essentially means that there's something outside of God that is dictating what's right and what's wrong. And of course that flies in the face that God is this omnipotent, all-knowing being, because if he is, then how come something outside of him is dictating what's right and what's wrong? And that's simply too much power that Christians are willing to give away from God. Now, I remember I talked about this probably about a year ago on my other channel, before I split them up, and one of the reasons I split them up is because I don't think my gaming stuff meshes with my philosophical and political stuff. I remember someone said, okay, well, God commands us not to be murderers because He loves His subjects, and therefore, He loves us and doesn't want to see us, be killed off and that sort of thing. But that falls into this category because, God's coming to that reasoning outside of His own commandments. It's simply saying that that love would be the highest moral standard because it's love that's causing God to protect human life, not His judgments alone. So that would make love the highest moral standard. As well, we can come to that kind of conclusion on our own. We don't need God to come and tell us that, I love my family members, therefore I don't want to see them killed. I can come to that reasoning simply on my own. You can come to that reasoning simply on your own. After all, you gave that reasoning to me. And finally, of course, there's a complication about how exactly do we interpret God's commands. Do we interpret them through the Bible? But, the Bible is translated by humans, so at that point you have to give a margin of human error. You can't simply say that the Bible is God's will, because obviously if we're translating it, we can screw up translating it, therefore subject to human error. You can't say that He gives us His will through prayer, because essentially that means I could, justify anything. I could say that, I could kill a whole bunch of people because God told me to kill a whole bunch of people. And, if that's your defense in court, God told me to do it, that's not going to fly. So there's kind of an issue there about how exactly are God's commandments dictated to us. But there are a lot of problems with God giving us our moral reasoning and giving us our ethical code. It just runs into too many slippery slopes. There's just too many problems with it. Therefore, most religious scholars reject it, and most regular philosophers reject it. So, if God is removed from our ethical thinking and ethical philosophy, where does that leave us? Well, that leaves a vacuum. And this vacuum is filled by one of two theories. And that is utilitarianism and Kantianism. And we'll talk about those next time when we get to see, now that God's not there, what happens now. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I want to thank you guys for watching. This has been Joseph, signing off for now, and I'll see you guys later.